This isn't some story I read online. This actually happened to me. It's the kind of thing you think only happens in movies, until you're the one sitting across from your husband as he shatters your entire world with a single casual sentence. The condensation on my champagne flute felt impossibly cold against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the warm, celebratory buzz filling the private dining room at Mastro's Ocean Club in Scottsdale. We were surrounded by dark wood, soft light, and the quiet clinking of silverware on porcelain, the soundtrack of success. Mark, my husband of 12 years, raised his glass, the diamond on his watch catching the light. We were there to celebrate the biggest moment of our lives. Tomorrow, we were closing on our dream home in Paradise Valley. Across the table, nestled in its velvet box, sat the custom-made, gold-plated key from the realtor. It was a tacky, extravagant gesture, but tonight it felt like a holy relic. Mark tapped the box with a perfectly manicured finger. "To the future, Clara," he said, his smile as blindingly confident as ever. I smiled back, my heart so full I thought it might burst. And that's when he dropped the bomb, his tone so light you'd think he was commenting on the wine. "Just a tiny little hiccup with the closing tomorrow," he said, taking a sip. "The down payment, it's gone. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." The silence that followed his words was a physical thing. It sucked the air out of the room, leaving a ringing in my ears. The low hum of conversation from the main restaurant, the gentle jazz music, it all faded into a distant roar. My smile froze on my face, a brittle, stupid thing. "What?" I whispered. The word was a puff of air, nothing more. "Don't look so panicked," he chuckled, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "It's a temporary liquidity issue. A market fluctuation. Nothing to worry about." Mark was a financial advisor. He spoke a language of assets, liquidity, and market fluctuations that I'd learned to trust implicitly. He handled everything. Our savings, our investments, the 401k he'd rolled over from my old teaching job. I handled the home, the social calendar, our lives. It was a partnership, or so I'd believed. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, my voice a little stronger this time. "The $250,000? From the joint savings account at Chase? The money we've been saving for 7 years. That's the one," he said, spearing a piece of ahi tuna from his plate. He chewed thoughtfully for a moment before continuing. "I moved it into a better position. A high-growth asset. It was about to pop, Clara. We would have doubled it, maybe tripled it. We could have bought the house in cash and had $1 million left over." He was talking about it like a missed bus, not the smoldering wreckage of our future. "Where is it now, Mark?" I asked, my hands gripping the thick linen napkin in my lap, so hard my knuckles were white. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes held a flicker of something I'd never seen before. Pity. Not for me, but for my ignorance. "It's in crypto," he said. "And it's gone. The market took a nosedive this morning. It's wiped out. But it'll bounce back. It always does." The world tilted. The beautiful house with the pool and the bougainvillea-covered walls, the one we'd put the offer on, the one whose floor plans I had memorized, it evaporated. 7 years of meticulous saving. Every bonus he'd ever made, a portion of every paycheck, the inheritance my grandmother had left me 5 years ago. It was all in that account. $250,000. He had taken it, gambled it on something I didn't understand, and lost it all. And he'd told me over a $500 dinner like it was a piece of trivial gossip. The waiter appeared at his elbow, a ghost in a crisp white jacket. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Mark smiled at him, all charm and teeth. "Just the check, thank you." He turned back to me. "We need to call the realtor in the morning and ask for an extension. I'll smooth it over." He reached across the table to pat my hand, but I pulled it away as if his touch was scalding. For the first time in our marriage, I looked at the man I loved and felt nothing but a cold, terrifying dread. The ride home in his sleek, black Audi was silent. The streets of Scottsdale, usually so vibrant and alive, felt like a ghost town. I stared out the window at the palm trees and sprawling stucco homes, each one a monument to a life that was no longer mine. When we walked into our perfectly nice, but suddenly suffocatingly small rental home, I went straight to our home office. I sat down at the iMac, my fingers trembling as I navigated to the Chase Bank website. Mark came and stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. "Clara, what are you doing?" "I told you I'll handle it." I didn't answer. I typed in our username and password, the same one we'd used for a decade. The screen loaded. Incorrect password. I tried again, slower this time, making sure each character was perfect. Incorrect password. Your account has been temporarily locked after too many failed attempts. My blood ran cold. "You changed the password," I said, my voice flat. "Of course I did," he said, his tone laced with a weary condescension. "I can't have you going in there and making emotional decisions, selling at a loss. It's for your own good. Our own good. You don't understand how these markets work." He was locking me out, not just from the account, but from our life. He had built a wall around our finances, and I had been too trusting, too complacent to even notice the bricks being laid. I was a passenger in my own marriage, and the driver had just steered us off a cliff. My mind raced, trying to grasp the scale of the betrayal. It wasn't just the house. It was the secrecy. The lies. How long had this been going on? He saw the storm brewing in my eyes, and his expression softened into a mask of placating concern. "Babe, listen to me," he said, walking over and kneeling beside my chair. He tried to take my hands, but I balled them into fists. "This is a setback, that's all. I will fix this. I promise you. In a few months, you'll see. We'll be in an even better house. You have to trust me." But the thing was, I didn't. Trust wasn't a switch you could just flip back on. It was a delicate, glass-blown thing, and he had just taken a hammer to it. The trust was gone, and in its place, something else was beginning to grow. Something hard and cold and sharp. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "I'm going to bed," I said, my voice hollow. I walked past him, refusing to meet his gaze. As I lay in our bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, the reality began to sink in, layer by painful layer. The money wasn't just gone. He had stolen it. He had stolen our future, my security, my grandmother's legacy. He had done it all while smiling in my face, telling me he loved me. And the worst part, the most humiliating part of it all? He truly believed he had the right to do it. He saw me as a child who needed protecting from the complexities of the world he so effortlessly navigated. I lay there for hours, a silent scream trapped in my chest. The man sleeping soundly beside me, his breathing deep and even, was a stranger. And as the first pale light of dawn crept through the blinds, I knew my life as I knew it was over. But a new one was about to begin. Because as I lay there, listening to the man who had ruined me sleep, I wasn't just feeling despair. I was feeling rage. A quiet, simmering rage that was slowly burning away the tears. He thought I was weak. He thought I was ignorant. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The first step was to find out just how deep the rot went. And to do that, I needed to get past the wall he had built. I needed to find a key. I waited 2 days. 2 agonizing days where I played the part of the distraught but supportive wife. I made his coffee in the morning, listened with a blank face as he spun elaborate tales to the realtor about a wire transfer delay, and nodded when he told me not to worry my pretty little head about it. Inside, I was a coiled snake. I watched his every move. I noted where he put his wallet, the way he angled his laptop screen away from me, the new, complex password he typed with practiced ease. He had a habit of leaving his briefcase on the hall table when he got home. He'd always been a little careless, a little arrogant. He thought he was too smart to get caught. That was his first mistake. My first piece of luck came on the 3rd night. He came home late, smelling of whiskey and the cloying perfume of a client dinner. He was exhausted and irritable. He dropped his briefcase, went straight upstairs to shower, and I heard the water running. It was my chance. My heart hammered against my ribs as I unzipped the main compartment. Inside was his laptop, a mess of papers, and a leather-bound notebook. His Bible, he called it. I always thought it was for work notes. I flipped it open. It wasn't just work notes. It was a ledger. page after page of dates, numbers, and cryptic acronyms, BTC, ETHSOL. Beside them were sums of money that made me feel sick. $10,000 here, $25,000 there. And the dates went back almost 2 years. It wasn't a recent gamble, it was a long-term, secret obsession. My eyes scanned the pages, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of his deception. He hadn't just lost the down payment. He had been systematically draining our accounts for years, feeding his addiction. Then I saw it, a separate section at the back of the notebook. It was titled Contingency. Underneath were account numbers for a bank I'd never heard of, Interpacific Bank of the Cayman Islands. There was one entry, a transfer of $50,000, dated just last week. A contingency. For him. Not for us. He had an escape hatch. A secret stash of cash hidden offshore, while our joint savings were being incinerated. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. He wasn't just a reckless gambler. He was a methodical thief. He had been planning this. He had insulated himself. The shower upstairs stopped. I snapped the notebook shut, shoved it back into the briefcase exactly as I'd found it, and zipped it closed just as his footsteps sounded on the stairs. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read a magazine, when he came down, wrapped in a towel. My hands were shaking, but my face was a mask of calm. "Everything okay?" he asked, rubbing his hair with another towel. "Just tired," I said, not looking up from the page. "It's been a stressful few days." "I know, baby," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I promise it's all going to be okay." That night, I didn't sleep at all. The rage was gone, replaced by something colder, clearer. Ice. I saw my path forward with a terrifying clarity. Mark thought he was playing a game against an amateur. He had no idea I had just found his playbook. The next morning, I began my own ledger. I bought a simple spiral notebook from a CVS on the other side of town, paying with cash. My first entry was the Cayman Islands bank account number. The second was the name of a person I found in his text messages, a woman named Amber, who he'd been texting with alarming frequency, full of laughing emojis and dinner plans. The third was the name of the top divorce attorney in Phoenix. I Googled her on my phone using the public Wi-Fi at a Starbucks. Her name was Thea Romano. Her website described her as a specialist in complex financial dissolutions and asset recovery. It was perfect. I was no longer just a victim. I was a researcher, gathering evidence for a war he didn't even know I was planning to declare. For the next week, I was a ghost in my own home. I learned the password to his laptop by filming him over his shoulder with my phone from across the room, a risky move that made my heart pound. The video was blurry, but by watching it over and over in slow motion, I pieced it together. Emmett RK wins. 23. The sheer arrogance of it almost made me laugh. Once I was in, a whole new world of deceit opened up. I found the crypto exchange accounts. The losses were catastrophic. He had turned over $500,000 of our money into less than 10,000. It was all there in a sea of red numbers and downward trending graphs. But I also found the trail for the $50,000 he'd sent to the Caymans. It was a clean wire transfer from our joint investment account, an account I thought was for blue-chip stocks, not for his personal slush fund. I took screenshots of everything, saved them to a password-protected cloud account he knew nothing about, and then meticulously deleted the browser history. He was so confident in my ignorance that he didn't even bother to hide his tracks very well. The picture was becoming clearer. He had gambled away our future, siphoned off a safety net for himself, and was likely having an affair. The smug, condescending man I was married to was a fraud, a liar, and a thief. And he was still patting me on the head every night, telling me he would fix it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I found the emails with Amber. She was a real estate agent. Not our real estate agent, but a rival one. They weren't just planning dinners, they were looking at properties. Small, sleek condos in downtown Phoenix. Bachelor pads. He wasn't just building a financial escape hatch. He was building a whole new life. A life without me. The realization hit me not with a wave of sadness, but with a jolt of pure, unadulterated fury. He wasn't just going to leave me. He was going to leave me with nothing, believing I was too stupid and helpless to do anything about it. I sat there in the dark, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating my face, and I smiled. It was a grim, tight smile, completely devoid of warmth. "You want to play, Mark?" I whispered to the empty room. "Let's play." He had underestimated me. He thought he held all the cards. But I had an ace up my sleeve. Something he didn't value, something he had forgotten I even had. Something that was mine and mine alone. The confrontation I knew was coming happened a week later. We were in the kitchen. I was making tea, my back to him, when he cleared his throat. "So," he began, his voice taking on that familiar, patronizing tone he used for serious conversations. "I've been crunching the numbers and I have a plan." I didn't turn around. I just stood there, letting the kettle scream. "I'm going to have to liquidate some of the remaining positions in our investment portfolio. It's not ideal to sell at a loss, but it'll free up enough capital to get us back on track. We can make a new, smaller offer on a different house. Something more manageable for a while." He was talking about my portfolio. The one my father, a cautious, old-school investor, had helped me set up before he died. It was mostly stable, low-yield bonds and blue-chip stocks. It was my safety net. My name was on it, but because we were married, he had access. He was planning to gut it to cover his losses. I turned around slowly, a ceramic mug in my hand. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a dropped stone. He blinked, taken aback. "No, Clara, this is the only way. You have to be realistic." "I'm being perfectly realistic," I said, my voice as cold and calm as the ice that now lived in my veins. "I'm realizing that you have gambled away our entire life savings. I'm realizing that you have a secret bank account in the Cayman Islands. I'm realizing that you're planning on leaving me for a real estate agent named Amber. I'm being the most realistic I have ever been in my entire life." The color drained from his face. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock, then anger. "What are you talking about? Have you been spying on me? Going through my things?" "You call it spying," I said, taking a step forward. "I call it waking up. The $250,000 for the house is gone. The retirement fund is gone. My inheritance is gone. And you stand there and tell me the solution is to steal the last thing I have left. It's not stealing. It's our money, Clara," he yelled, his voice rising. "We're married. What's yours is mine. It's called a partnership. Maybe if you ever took an interest in our finances instead of planning dinner parties, you'd understand that." It was the classic deflection. Blame the victim. Make me feel small, ignorant, and complicit in my own destruction. The old me would have shrunk. The old me would have cried and apologized for upsetting him. The new me just stared at him, my expression unreadable. "A partnership requires trust, Mark. It requires honesty. You have shown me neither. You have treated me like an idiot, a child who can't be trusted with adult matters. You've lied to me every single day for years." "I did it for us," he shouted, his face turning red. "I was trying to build us a better life. A life you couldn't even imagine. I took a risk. Sometimes risks don't pay off. That's the game." "This isn't a game," I screamed back, the control finally snapping. The mug in my hand trembled. "This was my life. My future. My grandmother's memory. And you threw it all away on a digital pipe dream, so you could feel like a big shot." He took a step towards me, his finger jabbing the air. "You know what? I'm done with this. I'm done with your hysterics. I'm the one who works. I'm the one who earns the money that allows you to live this comfortable life. I will fix this, and I will do it my way. You will not touch that portfolio. That is final." He stood there, puffed up with arrogance and self-righteousness, looking down his nose at me. He truly believed he had all the power. He believed he could command me, shut me down, and I would just meekly fall in line as I always had. In his world, he was the king, and I was just a decorative and frankly inconvenient piece of furniture. He had made our life, and he could unmake it at his leisure. He saw my silence as submission. He gave a curt nod, as if the matter was settled, and walked out of the kitchen, grabbing his keys from the bowl by the door. "I'm going out," he said, not looking at me. Don't wait up. The front door slammed shut, and the house fell into a profound silence. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, my knuckles white around the cooling mug. He thought he had won. He thought he had put me back in my box. But all he had done was light the fuse. The fight hadn't broken me. It had galvanized me. It was the final confirmation that the man I married was gone, replaced by a selfish, cruel stranger. And there was no reasoning with a stranger. There was only defeating them. I put the mug down, walked over to my purse, and took out my phone. I dialed the number for Thea Romano, the divorce attorney. When her assistant answered, my voice was steady. "My name is Clara Caldwell," I said. "I need to book an emergency consultation. It's a matter of significant financial fraud." As I hung up, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The war had been declared. He just didn't know he was the enemy. He thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn that the quietest people often have the most to fight for. My resolve was no longer just a feeling, it was a plan. And the first step was already in motion. My meeting with Thea Romano took place 2 days later in a sleek, intimidating office on the 20th floor of a Phoenix skyscraper. The view of Camelback Mountain was stunning, but I barely noticed. Thea was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, an impeccably tailored suit, and an air of zero tolerance for bullshit. I laid everything out for her. The crypto losses, the secret Cayman account, the emails with Amber, the screenshots I had taken. I spoke calmly and factually, presenting my evidence like a prosecutor. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and steepled her fingers. "Well, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice a low, calculated purr. "You have been busy." "He's going to drain my personal portfolio next," I said. "He thinks it's marital property. He wants to use it to cover his gambling debts." "And is it?" Thea asked. "Was it commingled with marital funds? Did you use it for joint expenses?" "No," I said firmly. "It's always been separate. My father set it up in a trust for me before we were even married. The statements come to a P.O. box I maintain. Mark has access as a financial manager, but he's never put a dime in or taken a dime out. It's clean." Thea's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. That's very good. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze that account immediately. He won't be able to touch a penny." She paused, looking at me intently. "Now, the money he lost, that's a harder fight. Proving financial dissipation in a crypto context is notoriously difficult in Arizona family court. The Cayman account is a different story. That's a clear fraudulent transfer. We can go after that. But it will be a long, ugly, and expensive fight." I felt a familiar wave of despair threaten to pull me under. An ugly fight. Expensive. I had no money. He had taken it all. "I don't have any money for an expensive fight," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "He locked me out of everything. The joint checking, the savings, it's all gone." Thea leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice softening slightly. "What else do you have? Any assets that are solely in your name? Anything he doesn't know about or doesn't value?" My mind went blank for a moment, and then an image surfaced. An image of dark velvet boxes in a cold, sterile room. My grandmother's jewelry. A collection I rarely wore but cherished deeply. A 3-carat diamond engagement ring from the 1940s. A sapphire necklace, emerald earrings. A heavy gold bracelet from my great-grandmother. Mark had always dismissed it. Old-fashioned, he'd called it. Tacky. He had no idea what it was worth. "I have jewelry," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Heirlooms. They're mine. They were my mother's and my grandmother's before that." "Where are they?" "In a safe deposit box at a Bank of America branch. The box is in my name only. My mother set it up for me years ago." Thea's smile returned, wider this time. "Then that's your war chest." The very next day, I drove to that Bank of America. The familiar ritual of signing in, of being escorted by a guard into the sterile, cold vault, felt different this time. It wasn't a nostalgic visit. It was a business transaction. Inside the private viewing room, I laid out the velvet boxes on the cold metal table. The diamonds and sapphires winked under the harsh fluorescent light. They were beautiful, filled with memories of women I loved and admired. Women who were survivors. For a moment I felt a pang of guilt. This was my heritage. But then I thought of Mark's smug face, of his contingency plan, of his new life with Amber being built on the ashes of mine. The guilt vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My grandmother would not have wanted her legacy to fund her granddaughter's destitution. She would have wanted me to fight. I packed the jewelry into my purse, my heart heavy but my purpose clear. On Thea's recommendation, I didn't go to a pawn shop or a local jeweler. I went to a high-end private appraiser in Old Town Scottsdale who dealt with estate sales. The man, a refined gentleman named Mr. Sterling, examined each piece with a jeweler's loupe, his face impassive. After an hour of silent inspection, he looked up at me over his spectacles. "These are exquisite pieces, madam," he said. "The craftsmanship is superb." He gave me a number, an appraisal value that was so much higher than I had ever imagined that I had to ask him to repeat it. It wasn't just a good amount of money. It was life-changing money. It was enough for Thea's retainer. It was enough for a security deposit on an apartment. And if I was smart, it was enough for something much, much bigger. "I don't want to sell them at auction," I told him, my mind racing. "I need a private sale. Fast. And quiet." He nodded slowly. "I have a client. A collector from back east. He appreciates pieces with history. I can make a call." 3 days later, the deal was done. The money, a wire transfer so large it felt unreal, was sitting in a new checking account at a completely different bank, an account opened in my name only. The jewelry was gone. My past was sold. But for the first time in months, I felt like I owned my future. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, looking at the account balance on my phone. The plan, which had started as a whisper of an idea, was now screaming in my head. It was audacious. It was risky. It was terrifying. It was perfect. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to win. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The dream house in Paradise Valley. The one Mark had lost. The deal had fallen through, of course. Mark had told me, with a sigh of feigned regret, that the sellers had gone with another offer. He had no idea I'd already been in contact with the seller's agent. I'd called her myself, posing as a prospective buyer's assistant, and learned that the house was, in fact, back on the market. They were furious with Mark for wasting their time, and were looking for a quick, clean all-cash offer. An all-cash offer. I looked down at the balance on my phone again. I didn't have enough to buy it outright, not even close. But I had more than enough for the original down payment. I had enough to secure a mortgage on my own. I had a perfect credit score and now, a substantial asset base. Mark had thought my jewelry was worthless. He was about to find out it was the key. The key to the house he wanted, and the key to his destruction. The next few weeks were a masterclass in covert operations. I lived a double life. To Mark, I was the subdued, slightly depressed wife, slowly coming to terms with our financial setback. I let him believe he was still in control, that his plan to liquidate my portfolio was still on the table, just delayed by some legal paperwork I was dragging my feet on. He grew more and more frustrated with my supposed incompetence, which played perfectly into my hands. The more he underestimated me, the easier my real work became. My other life was a whirlwind of secret phone calls, encrypted emails, and discreet meetings. I met with a mortgage broker Thea recommended, a woman named Carol who, after hearing a heavily redacted version of my story, took on my cause with a quiet ferocity. We structured the loan application around my assets, the cash from the jewelry sale, and the untainted trust portfolio, which Thea's injunction had successfully shielded from Mark's grasp. My name was the only one on the application. I was listed as unmarried. A small lie that was legally permissible since divorce proceedings hadn't officially been filed. Simultaneously, I opened a line of communication with the sellers of the Paradise Valley house through a new real estate agent, a discreet professional also found by Thea. I made an offer. It was a strong offer, at the full asking price, with a massive down payment and proof of funds that were ironclad. To hide my identity from Mark, should he happen to get wind of a new offer on the house, we submitted the offer under the name of a newly formed LLC, something innocuous like desert bloom properties. The legal paperwork was a mountain, but I tackled it with a focus I hadn't felt since college. I read every line of every document, understanding the intricate dance of escrow, title insurance, and closing disclosures. The person Mark thought was incapable of balancing a checkbook was now navigating the complexities of a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction. The most dangerous part was keeping Mark in the dark. He was still obsessed with the idea of crypto, spending hours staring at his laptop, convinced a market rebound was just around the corner. "You'll see, Clara," he'd say with a manic gleam in his eye. "It's coming back. We're going to be richer than ever." I would just nod, a pit of disgust in my stomach. He was a man clinging to a life raft in the middle of a hurricane, completely unaware that I was sailing away in a battleship. The close calls were terrifying. One evening, he walked into the office while I was on the phone with Carol, the mortgage broker. I saw his reflection in the dark screen of the monitor and seamlessly switched my tone. "Yes, Mom, I know," I said into the phone. "I'll be sure to check on the sprinklers when I'm over there next week." "Okay, love you too." I hung up, my heart jackhammering. Mark just grunted, grabbing a file before leaving, oblivious. The day the loan was officially approved felt like the first real taste of victory. I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot when Carol called. "We're cleared to close, Clara," she said, and I broke down in tears, a messy, cathartic flood of relief and terror. The plan was no longer a dream. It was happening. We set the closing date. As fate would have it, it was exactly 1 month to the day from that disastrous dinner at Mastro's. The final piece of the puzzle was getting Mark to the closing table. He, of course, thought it was a meeting I'd set up with a new financial advisor Thea had recommended to help us get our affairs in order. He was smug about it, assuming this new advisor would surely side with him and convince me to release my portfolio. "Finally, you're listening to reason," he'd said, preening. "It's about time you let a professional handle this." The morning of the closing, the air in our rental house was thick with unspoken tension. I dressed carefully, choosing a sharp, navy blue dress that screamed competence. It was my armor. Mark put on one of his most expensive suits, ready to impress and intimidate the advisor he thought he was about to meet. He was a peacock, strutting towards his own doom. As we drove to the title company's office in Scottsdale, he lectured me on market strategy. He was completely in his element, arrogant and condescending to the very end. I just stared out the window, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my mind a sea of calm. I was terrified, yes, but underneath the fear was a foundation of steel. He had built it himself with every lie, every insult, every act of betrayal. He had forged the weapon of his own destruction. We walked into the sterile, quiet office of Pioneer Title Agency. A woman with a polite smile greeted us. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell? Right this way. We're all set for you in the conference room." Mark strode in ahead of me, all swagger and confidence. He stopped dead when he saw the table. It wasn't set for a financial consultation. It was piled high with closing documents. The seller's agent was there, as was my agent and the title officer. "What is this?" Mark asked, his eyes darting around the room in confusion. "I thought we were meeting with an advisor." The title officer, a calm woman named Susan, gestured to the chairs. "Please have a seat. We're here for the closing on the property at 7812 Desert View Lane." Mark's face broke into a relieved, arrogant grin. He shot me a look, a mixture of surprise and approval. He thought I had caved. He thought I had somehow found the money from my portfolio and was surprising him, proving my devotion. "Clara, you sly fox," he laughed, taking a seat. "I didn't know you had it in you." I sat down opposite him, my expression unreadable. "Let's get this over with," I said softly. Susan began pushing the mountain of paper towards the head of the table. "Okay, as you know, this is an all-cash purchase from the seller's perspective, with the buyer's financing already secured. We just need the final signatures from the buyer." She slid the primary signature document across the polished wood. "Right here, please." Mark reached for the pen, but she slid the document past him, placing it directly in front of me. He froze, his hand hovering in the air. He looked at the paper, then at me, a deep frown of confusion on his face. "Shouldn't I be signing?" he asked, his voice losing some of its bluster. Susan looked at her paperwork. "My apologies, are you the designated trustee for Desert Bloom Properties, LLC? Mark stared at her blankly. "What? No. I'm Mark Caldwell. We're the buyers." "I'm sorry, sir," Susan said, her professional calm unwavering. "The buyer on this transaction is the LLC. The sole trustee and signatory for that entity is Clara Caldwell." The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents. Mark's head swiveled slowly from Susan to the documents and finally to me. The arrogant, confident mask he wore cracked, and for the first time, I saw the man underneath, a weak, confused man completely out of his depth. "Clara," he whispered, his voice small. "What is this? What's she talking about?" I picked up the heavy blue ink pen. Its weight felt good in my hand. Solid. Real. "She's talking about the house, Mark," I said, my voice level and clear, cutting through the silence. "My house. The one I'm buying. With the money from my grandmother's jewelry. The tacky, old-fashioned jewelry you never thought was worth anything." His jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. He looked from me to the smiling real estate agents, his mind clearly struggling to connect the dots. The world he had so carefully constructed, a world in which he was the master, was crumbling around him in real time. You can't," he stammered. "We were supposed to. This is our money. Our house." "There is no our anymore, Mark," I said. I signed my name on the first line, my signature a clean, decisive stroke. "There is my money, and the marital money you gambled away on cartoon dogs and internet memes. As for the house, you were right. The deal did fall through. For you." I pushed the signed document back to Susan, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mark just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The sheer audacity of my plan was something his mind couldn't process. He had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered, so completely blindsided, that he was rendered speechless. But how, was all he could manage. At that moment, a new person entered the room. It was a man in a sharp suit, carrying a leather folio. He walked directly to our table. Mark looked up at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes, perhaps thinking this was an ally, a lawyer, someone who could make sense of this madness. The man didn't look at Mark. He looked at me, then placed a neatly bound set of documents on the table directly in front of my husband. "Mr. Caldwell," the man said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My name is David Chun. I'm an associate from Thea Romano's office. You're being served." Mark stared down at the documents. On the cover sheet in bold black letters were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." His eyes scanned the first page, his face contorting into a mask of pure disbelief and rage. He looked up at me, his eyes wild. "You're divorcing me?" he hissed, his voice a raw, ugly thing. "After everything I've done for you?" "No, Mark," I said, standing up from the table, my part in the proceedings finished. "I'm divorcing you because of everything you've done to me." I turned to the real estate agent and the title officer. "Thank you for everything," I said with a polite smile. I picked up my purse and the single beautiful gold-plated key to my new home. I walked towards the door of the conference room, my back straight, my heels clicking purposefully on the floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of his gaze on my back, the impotent fury of a king who had just been dethroned in his own throne room. He had lost everything. The money, the house, the wife he thought was his possession. All he had left was a portfolio of worthless digital coins and a stack of divorce papers outlining, in excruciating detail, his every financial crime. As I walked out into the bright Arizona sunshine, I felt a sense of release, so profound it almost brought me to my knees. The weight I had been carrying for years was gone. I was no longer Mrs. Clara Caldwell, the supportive wife of a successful financial advisor. I was Clara Caldwell, the woman who had clawed her way back from the abyss, using the very tools of the man who tried to bury her. He thought the game was about money and power. He never understood it was about survival. I got into my car, the new key cool and heavy in my hand. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, driving towards my new life, my new home. A home bought and paid for with the strength of the women who came before me, and the fire he had ignited within me. The war was over. I had won. The first night in the house was quieter than I could have ever imagined. The sheer volume of the space, after our cramped rental, was almost overwhelming. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I walked from room to room, my hand trailing along the cool, freshly painted walls. The furniture from our old life hadn't arrived yet. It would be sorted and divided by lawyers in the coming weeks. All I had was an inflatable mattress in the middle of the cavernous living room, a bottle of champagne I'd bought at the grocery store, and a single wine glass. I sat on the floor cross-legged, looking out through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights of Phoenix twinkling in the distance. The view was breathtaking. This was the view Mark had coveted, the symbol of the success he was so desperate to project. He had wanted to own this view, to possess it, just as he had wanted to possess me. I took a sip of the champagne. It was cold and crisp, a celebration in a bottle. But the feeling inside me wasn't jubilant. It wasn't the giddy rush of victory I had expected. It was something deeper, quieter. It was peace. A profound, bone-deep peace that I hadn't felt in years. I had spent the last month fueled by rage and adrenaline, operating on a level of focus and cunning I never knew I possessed. I had become a warrior, a strategist, a player in a game I was never meant to understand. But now, in the silence of my victory, the warrior could finally rest. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind not emptiness but clarity. I saw Mark for what he was. Not a monster, but a small, insecure man, terrified of being seen as ordinary. His arrogance was a shield, his lies a desperate attempt to build a fantasy world where he was always the winner. He had to tear me down to feel tall. In the end, his downfall wasn't the bad investment or the lies. It was his ego. He simply could not conceive of a world in which I was his equal, let alone his superior. His inability to see me, to truly see me as a person with her own mind and her own strength, was the fatal flaw in his grand design. I thought about the jewelry, the tangible pieces of my past that I had liquidated to build this new future. I felt a pang of loss, but it was fleeting. The strength they represented wasn't in the stones or the gold. It was in the legacy they carried. And I was carrying that legacy forward. I was a survivor, just like my mother and her mother before her. A text message vibrated on my phone, sitting on the floor beside me. It was from an unknown number. I already knew who it was. "You will regret this, Clara. I will destroy you." I read the words and I didn't feel a flicker of fear. The man who sent that message had no power over me anymore. He had already done his worst, and I had not only survived it, I had thrived. I deleted the message without replying. He was nothing now but a ghost, a bad memory in a life I was leaving behind. I stood up and walked to the sliding glass door, opening it to the warm desert night. The air smelled of jasmine and dry earth. The only sound was the gentle whisper of the breeze through the palm trees. He thought the silence of this house was his prize, but he never understood. It was my weapon. The end.